Happy Halloween, everybody. Welcome to this 27th rendition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. I'm your host, Michael Wein, as we come together twice or three times a week to talk about Texas sports and other college sports. Today, we have a loaded show, new top 10 college football power rankings that Emmy and I have put together collectively. We'll react a little bit to the rankings that came out by the college football committee themselves a little bit right at the start of the show. Then we'll get into our rankings. There was a big commitment last week pertaining to the Longhorns, five-star wide receiver out of the state of Missouri, Wingo, sort of unexpectedly committed to Texas for their third five-star of the 2024 cycle. Can they hold on to him? That's another story. And then, lastly, college basketball starts in less than a week. It starts on Monday. We're going to get into our national championship bubble, not puddle, where we're going to talk about 5 or 6 teams we think could win, actually be in the conversation right now to win the national championship. Of course, things evolve as the season goes along. Injuries happen. Teams don't look as good as they should. Some teams look better than they're expected to be. But right now, we're just going to have a conversation about that. On Thursday or Friday, hopefully, we're going to get another episode in where we talk about our most intriguing players. But with all that being said, let's jump right into it, and let's welcome in my co-host, Emmy Nixon. How are you doing on this fine Halloween evening?
I'm doing good, man. I'm feeling good. This episode is a long time coming because we've been trying to get our college basketball previews in. Haven't been able to do all the team previews, so we're, I guess, settling for this. But settling isn't really the right word. But shifting over to this. But I'm excited. Also, some Ryan Wingo talk. That's a big deal for Texas. Really takes away some of the doubts that some people may have had. But we'll get into all of it.
Yep.
I'm excited.
I'm excited that you're excited. Look, I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm extending my time that we have to sort of talk about college basketball from a preview standpoint into next week, because the Champions Classic doesn't happen until the week after, and that's really what I consider the start of college basketball season, is when those 4 teams get together like they usually do every year. I think it's Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, and there's one more that I'm forgetting. Michigan State. There's some combination of matchups that happen there, and it's not going to happen next week. It's going to happen the next 2 weeks from tonight, I think, since tonight is Tuesday. So I'm excited for that. Maybe we'll react to – possibly what we'll do is maybe we can react to Texas's first game or something like that. I don't know yet. That's for next week. We're in the present. First, I want to kind of get your reaction. Were you able to see the full top 10 from the College Football Playoff Committee? And if so, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, the talk around Ohio State being number 1, that's a big deal. And it wasn't what I expected, but I like it, actually. I think if we're trying to be consistent with resume and quality of opponent and obviously consistently winning, then Ohio State is the only team that checks all of those boxes. And you can nitpick about, the experience of their quarterback or all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, they've gone into Notre Dame and won. They've beaten up on a really good Penn State team where that game wasn't really even close. And with how their defense has been playing, I mean, I think they definitely have at least an argument to be number one. So I think I like the decision there.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a valid argument to be made for Ohio State at number one. I like the rankings. I think, you can tweak them possibly a little bit. I think the middle, I fully agree with Washington at 5, Oregon at 6, Texas at 7, Alabama at 8, and then Oklahoma at 9. There's a stretch there that I think you might find when we start to do our rankings might be pretty similar. I was a little surprised they have Ole Miss over Penn State. Penn State only lost coming to um, Ohio State, who's the number 1 team in the country. Ole Miss is only lost coming to Alabama, who's the number 8 team in the country. I mean, it's splitting hairs there. I think just depends on. I haven't watched a lot of Ole Miss. I've watched bits and pieces, but I haven't watched nearly as much of Ole Miss as I have Penn State. Um, we're going to talk about a lot of these teams. I think overall it's a pretty good ranking. Georgia at 2, I had no problem with that. Ultimately, they're playing a lot better. They're starting to find their stride, it seems like, even without Brock Bowers. But they really haven't played nearly as tough of a schedule as Ohio State. Neither has Michigan. Florida State has that win over LSU. And if LSU could potentially go into Bama this weekend, win that game, maybe get to the SEC championship game, and maybe win that, as they have the offense to do it. Their defense is another story, but that win could possibly start looking a lot better for Florida State. I think Florida State is, I don't want to jinx anything, but I think they are a notch above everyone else in the ACC right now. And I think if they run the table, they deserve to be in there. But and they haven't looked the greatest at times, but I think past couple of weeks they have started to get their stride a little bit. I love what Mike Norvell is doing there. So, look, things are going to change. They always say these rankings have a deadline of Saturday. When the games take place, things are going to change. Things will shift. So, if you're really getting too worked up about what team is ranked where right now, calm down. We still have over a month left with the rest of the regular season and conference championships to sort this thing out. So calm down. Don't get too worked up over the first rankings, but you can draw maybe some takeaways on what the committee values the most and kind of see what your team might need to do in order to elevate itself into that top 4. Okay, let's get to our rankings. Number 10, we went with Penn State. The committee went with Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss would probably be our number 11. Your thoughts on Penn State?
Well, number one, their defense, you can't underrate how good this defense is. I mean, really, in that Ohio State Penn State game, that Penn State defense, they showed up. They did what they had to do to keep Penn State in it for a good portion of the afternoon. Really, I think with what's his name, the edge rusher. I keep on blanking on his name. They also have Kalen King at corner. I mean they have multiple, high first round picks all up and down their defense. The talent isn't an issue. The consistency isn't an issue. Really, for Penn State, the reason why they're low is against Ohio State, against that elite opponent, they weren't able to create enough offense. And I'd like to see them utilize that running back duo a little bit more. Nick Singleton
Katron
and
Allen.
Katron Allen as well. They got to figure out ways to get them into space a little bit more often, in my opinion, because I think that's the best trait of their offense. The wide receivers on the outside, you could nitpick about whether they're elite or not, but uh, those two guys in that running back room, those have to be the guys that are going to carry them far if they go far.
I agree with you. I think Chop Robinson up front
Yeah,
and that lengthy, athletic defensive front, they can get after most of the teams they're going to play. Love their secondary. I think they got NFL players all over that secondary, including Kalen King, who you mentioned. Could be a top 15, top 10 NFL draft pick kind of guy coming out this year, potentially. I just think at points in times, Penn State struggles to know who they are offensively. Like, do they want to be a team that throws it down the field more? Do they have enough requisite talent on the outside to create that kind of separation that they need? Or do they want to be the power running football team that I think they should be with two very talented backs, Nick Singleton, who I think at his height is a top 5 back in the country, and Katron Allen, who I think will step into a more prominent role next year, which is really when Penn State, I think, will take that next step as they are somewhat of a younger team. They don't have something that we talked about in our Ohio State Penn State preview is that Ohio State defense. Not only is it fantastic and has NFL talent everywhere, those are all upperclassmen pretty much. These guys have been playing college football for a while. I think that was kind of a case of, these and what Mr. Knowles, the defensive coordinator, is doing at Ohio State right now is pretty incredible with that defense. Where they were 2 years ago to where they are now, it's completely different. But they were kind of at a stage back then that Penn State is now. Just a lot of young players, a younger team. I just want to see more of a consistent identity from them offensively over the next couple of weeks. You have a young quarterback who, for the most part, has been really good this year for a young quarterback. And I think leaning more into that run game, you have NFL players on your offensive line. The good thing for Penn State is the up front, the offensive and defensive lines, that's not an issue. The physicality is not an issue. The athleticism is not an issue. You have the athletes to compete. I think there's just that element of being a young team. And I think at times they struggle to know who they are offensively. Sometimes it looks really good. Sometimes it looks a little choppy, but that's what comes with playing. I think the greatest thing for Penn State right now is they're getting rid of divisions next year in the Big Ten. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to get any easier because you're adding Washington, you're adding Oregon, you're adding UCLA, and you're adding USC. And all those programs, I think, are in different spots right now. But adding those teams to an already pretty top-heavy Big Ten, it's gonna still be pretty top-heavy. But at least you're not log-jammed behind Ohio State and Michigan all the time. At least you'll have some opportunity to play some other teams, get some more quality wins or losses on your resume. And next year with the 12-team playoff, you won't have to worry about potentially being perfect or even a one-loss team. If you can maybe win your conference with 2 losses, I think that could put you in that 12-team playoff. I think next year is really when they'll take the step. I want to see what they do against Michigan here in a week or two. Yeah, I think that's enough on Penn State. Do you have anything more to add?
No.
Okay.
That's really it.
We are a Texas show, but we do respect Oklahoma on this show. Let's talk about the Sooners, who dropped to 9 after their loss to Kansas. Now, with all due respect to Kansas, they're a pretty good football team this year. They are 6-2, and they entered the rankings, I think, tonight at number 21. But that's a game I think Oklahoma and a lot of people around college football would have told you Oklahoma should have definitely won that game. Your thoughts on the Sooners in that game and overall as a team right now?
Well, it starts up front. I mean, with the Sooners. I mean, it's can they run the football? Can they create that, first down success rate, if you will, to get to those 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3 type of scenarios where they can really get aggressive and start to, open up the playbook at that point. It felt like in that Kansas game, every time they really got anything going, they would get a big penalty or a sack, or it just nothing felt like was on schedule or on rhythm or on timing for Oklahoma offensively. They were still effective. They still scored points, but it wasn't the smooth sailing type of offense that we saw against Texas, for example. And then defensively, while they're amazingly improved from last year, there's still, some holes there at different points in times. I think specifically up front, there is room to be had in the running game, and I think that was exploited a little bit against Kansas, and that was a Kansas team without
Jalen Daniels.
Jalen Daniels as well. So um, it's not a great loss for Oklahoma, because I think if you're Oklahoma, you would have liked to have gotten to the Big 12 title game undefeated, obviously, because then you would have some, I guess,
Margin for
momentum,
error. Yeah.
margin for error, exactly. So, we'll see. This thing isn't really over for them, but this loss definitely does hurt for sure.
Yeah, I think the toughest part about it is it this week could be even tougher. You're going into Bedlam, uh, coming off that loss, an Oklahoma State team with Ollie Gordon at the running back position. They found themselves. Mike Gundy's done a really good job with that team after they had a rough month of September. I think they're 7-1 as well. I don't think they're in the rankings. They might be. I haven't really looked. But you're going into Bedlam, and that's a road game. It's probably going to be the last time Oklahoma State gets their shot at Oklahoma. And so Oklahoma State's going to have something waiting for Oklahoma in that game. To me, I still think Dylan Gabriel is playing at a really high level. He did throw the pick six early on in that game. It seems like sometimes he kind of struggles to be decisive, especially throwing outside the numbers. And it didn't help that their star linebacker, Danny Stutzman, I believe, went out in that game with some sort of injury and really wasn't able to be a major factor in that second half. He really makes a difference connecting the front end of their defense to the back end of their defense. They've had some difficulty stopping the run. You've kind of seen old Oklahoma show up a little bit the past couple weeks, struggling to tackle a little bit on the perimeter. But I think they've come a long way. They're still a really good football team. They deserve to be in the top 10 because they have that win over the Longhorns, which was a really good win on a neutral field. I think their running game has gotten better the past couple weeks, but it's not nearly where it needs to be for them, I think, to jump into that national championship conversation. And the last thing about OU is their loss really opens things up in the Big 12 because now you have, I think, 5 teams that are in a logjam, all with one conference loss. You have K-State, you have Texas, Oklahoma, Iowa State, and then excuse me, there's one that I'm forgetting. It might be Kansas. Is it?
Is it Oklahoma State?
Yes, it's
No, it
Oklahoma.
might be Kansas. I'm not sure. I think Kansas has 2 losses though.
I think it's Oklahoma State. Yes, it is. Now Oklahoma State has 2 losses, so they're not really in the playoff conversation, but they still are very much in the conversation to get to. I need to drink some water. There's something in my throat, but they're still very much in the conversation to get to Arlington. They only have 1 loss in conference. Their offense looks really, really good, and if they can beat Oklahoma, you look at their schedule and it's BYU, Houston, and UCF. I think 3 very winnable games. So
Yeah, if you want to go grab some water real quick, I can move on
I
to
got some.
Alabama. Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
But you go ahead, give your thoughts on the Crimson Tide.
Well, for Alabama, the formula is simple. I mean, you win out and you're in. That's how it is for pretty much every team we've mentioned so far. It's win out and you control your own destiny. This week, I think we're going to learn a lot about them. I've mentioned that before, and Joel Klatt has been on about it as well. The fact that they haven't really shown that extra gear offensively. Like, can they go out and put up 40 against LSU? I mean, LSU's defense is not good, but Alabama's offense isn't perfect either. So there's definitely some question marks there in terms of can they hang with one of the best offenses in the country in LSU. I mean, that LSU offense, I mean, they really haven't had a miss up, really, outside of maybe the Arkansas game a few weeks back. But I mean, Jalen, wait, is it Jalen or Jaden? Jaden
Jaden.
Daniels. Yeah, Jaden Daniels has just been ridiculous. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, he's making a case to be a first round pick, but that's another conversation for another day. I think Bama right now, I mean, they're in a good spot. Their defense is playing a lot better. Um, I just, I really just can't wait for this weekend to come around because that's when we'll really know what this Alabama team is made of. And it's not like they haven't been tested before, but I think if you look at this young quarterback and, you know, some of the miscues in terms of reading the coverage, reading the field, that's going to be put to the test this week.
I think ultimately what that game will come down to is what happens inside the 20. I think both teams are going to move the football within the 20s, but we'll break that game down specifically later on this week. I think with Bama, your defense is playing excellent. It's been excellent the past month, and that's the part where you really get excited about this weekend. It's that explosive, hard to corral LSU offense with the quarterback that can get out of the pocket and make plays off script against a defense that plays physical, plays downhill, has the athletes up front. I think Bama, their offensive line's playing better. They've gotten some semblance of a running game, more so than they did, a couple weeks ago. I think they need to stick to that, stick to the quarterback design run. I think Tommy Reese has done a pretty good job of that lately. Look, they got down, what was it? I can't remember, 10, 17-3. I can't remember what it was against Tennessee. And then they absolutely just shut Tennessee down the rest of the game and were able to put up 34 points.
Yeah.
Lately, for most of the season, the problem with Bama's offense is that offensive line hasn't performed up to expectation in pass protection. There's been some miscues offensively with Jalen Milroe reading different coverages. I think if you're able to confuse him, generate a couple turnovers, that's really been the bugaboo for Jalen Milroe in that offense. But also, they've been behind the chains more than you would think an Alabama team would be behind the chains. And sometimes they get off schedule. It's easier said than done to get Jalen Milroe on the ground. You can get pressure on him, but it's easier said than done to get an athlete like that on the ground. But teams have been able to do it. And when Alabama gets behind the chains, they struggle because teams can pin their ears back. They can attack this. I don't want to say bad offensive line, but it's been iffy in pass protection all year. Um, so they can kind of attack this offensive line, and uh, they just don't have the quarterback right now that I think is ready to move them along in those situations. I love Jermaine Burton. I like some of the weapons that they have. I think they're in a good spot. This week, you're right, is the game that's going to tell us pretty much all we need to know. Uh, how far has this Bama team come since week 2 when they lost to Texas at home? So we'll find out. Jaden Daniels is a force to be reckoned with. So is Malik Neighbors in that LSU offense. So we will see. I'm excited to watch the matchup of Jaden Daniels going up against this Bama defense.
Yeah, and Malik Neighbors and Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to be amazing as well.
Absolutely. So let's talk about 7. We have Texas at 7. Your thoughts on the Horns, especially after this weekend where you saw and we were able to see our really first impressions of one Malik Murphy.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, he had the pick 6, I believe it was, second drive of the game. But, I mean, we talked about it last week. The other parts of the team were the ones that had to step up, and they did. The big special teams touchdown to start the game, and then the defense getting that quick turnover right back as soon as Malik made that mistake early. And I think that's when he was able to settle down and get his feet under him and get into a rhythm of the game a little bit more. Um, there was definitely some iffy moments here and there, but I mean, this Texas team, this Texas defense played so much better. Like that's the Texas team that we've been wanting to see these past few weeks. That we were expecting to see coming out of the bye week, where they got healthy, and we were just kind of expecting the Texas defense to get back into form and back into shape. So it's good to see this Texas secondary get back to playing good football and consistent football. And I think if the defense continues to play at that high of a level, then they'll be right in the mix of things.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing right now has been the struggles. Not really even inside the red zone. It's like when they get down inside the 5-yard line, they really struggle in those short goal line situations. I think it's probably you don't want to put it all on Sark, but you also, at least from a Saturday standpoint, playing against BYU, you don't um, fully want to put it on Malik Murphy because he's a redshirt freshman making his first ever start in college football. And if you look at what Quinn Ewers did in his first start as a starter last year against Louisiana Monroe, it wasn't all that. I mean, he didn't light it up either. So I think we're going to break down this K-State Texas game. I think it's probably going to be a dogfight because K-State's playing really good football, and Chris Kleinman, their coach, is one of the more, along with like the Kyle Whittinghams of the world at Utah, one of the more underrated, not talked about enough coaches in the entire country with what he does with that K-State program. Um, but look, lean on Jonathan Brooks, lean on this running game. They're just, I think the red zone thing is going to just have to be something they figure out as kind of the season goes on. The interesting thing that Sark said in his Monday press conference, I think it was yesterday, um, excuse me, is he's excited that this Texas team hasn't played their best football yet. I agree with him. I don't think they've played their best football yet, aside from maybe a couple short stretches in a couple of these games. I thought that the Baylor and Kansas wins were pretty. I mean, I thought those were. I thought I'd probably give them an A minus for the Baylor win. I mean, that was a team they were supposed to step on, and they did. They scored 38 points. It wasn't the prettiest all the time, but they did, romp Baylor, a team they were supposed to step on. Their defense played excellent in that game. Um, I thought that Kansas game, especially in the second half, was really good. And looking back, that's that's a good win for Texas. And then, of course, I thought that fourth quarter against Bama was really, really damn good.
Yeah.
To go in there and beat them by double digits. And on that last possession, to get the ball back up 10 points and basically run the ball right down Bama's throat and run out the clock in that football game. That was probably one of the more impressive things I've seen from a Texas football team overall since I became really a watcher of college football, to be honest with you. So, there's room. There is some gray area. I think the red zone is still an issue. Can you really trust this Texas team over the course of November? Is there going to be a loss coming in the next four, or can they kind of just work their way through, kind of like they've been doing this? I don't want to say like extremely tough part of their schedule, but a treacherous part of their schedule, I think is what you would say. Can they kind of work their way through, get to 11-1, and put themselves in a position to be in Arlington and win that football game? And if they do, a 12-1 Texas team, Big 12 champion, uh, only lost to Oklahoma, would have a really good argument, I think, to get in. As far as Quinn Ewers goes, this is the last thing I'll say. I think we're probably going to be waiting until at least that Iowa State game in 2 weeks. I think he's definitely going to be out this week against K-State. I think we'll probably hear that he's making progress next week, but I don't think I don't think he'll start against TCU. I think we're looking at the following week against Iowa State as potentially when he'll come back, and then we'll obviously have the Tech game on a Friday. I think it's Black Friday after Thanksgiving. So we'll see what happens. But I do think at this rate, Jonathan Brooks is going to be a first-team All-American as long as they continue to feed him the ball, both in the run game and in the passing game. I mean, he's kind of replaced Jordan Whittington. It's kind of like the fourth option in the passing game. I mean, Jordan Whittington used to be that guy, that kind of security blanket over the middle for these quarterbacks. You end up with 5 or 6 catches for 60 to 70 yards on his best days. It's kind of like that solid slot guy. But it really hasn't been that for Jordan Whittington this year. It's kind of weird. It's been more Jonathan Brooks in the short passing game as kind of like that security blanket for Quinn Ewers and or Malik Murphy. So I think AD Mitchell has really stepped up the past couple of weeks. 2 touchdowns on Saturday. Still questionable as a blocker on the outside, but he's done some really nice things in the passing game. Okay. Talk to us about Oregon.
Well, they're going to go as far as Bo Nix takes them. I mean, their defense is incredible. And, I mean, they're going to, I think, make the playoff. And it's going to be because of Bo Nix. I mean, what he did against Utah, going into Utah in that environment and just tearing them up like he did. I mean, he's completely evolved as a player. Like, you go back to when he was at Auburn. I mean, he was just not the same guy. Not even in the slightest. And now, I mean, he just rarely makes mistakes. I mean, he's a almost just, I don't want to say master of his craft, but he's definitely has a different level of feel for when to take those shots down the field and matchups and identifying those matchups. Um, he's just been extremely efficient. I don't know. It's something about this Oregon team, man. I don't know. I feel really confident in what they're doing and what Dan Lanning is doing. And part of me just feels like if they play Washington 10 times in a row, I mean, each team is going to win 5 or something crazy like that. It's really just how the dice rolls.
Yeah, to me, I think Oregon is a top 4 football team in the country right now. But the way that we rank teams, you can't rank them ahead of Washington right now. You can't really rank them ahead of any of these undefeated teams. It just wouldn't make sense from a power ranking standpoint. But I think if they play Washington again on a neutral field in Las Vegas for that Pac-12 championship game, I think there's a good chance Oregon wins that game. I would favor them in that game. Washington, they're really, really good. They're dangerous. I mean, there may not be a more dangerous team, at least from an offensive standpoint, in this top 10 than Washington when they're rolling. But as you mentioned, Bo Nix has come just, I mean, it's unreal what Bo Nix looks like now and what he looked like at Auburn. I think this Oregon team, they're physical and they're smart defensively. They really, that Dan Lanning, um, I guess, style of football, that personality, that toughness, that physicality really shines through in this Oregon defense. And with Troy Franklin on the outside, with Bucky Irving at running back, who has been a very profitable bet for me in prize picks lately. They are, I think they're a really complete football team. I don't think there are a whole lot of holes that you can poke in this uh, Oregon paper, if you will. So that's really all that needs to be said on Oregon. We are 38 minutes into this thing, so let's run through our top 5. We have Washington at 5. I believe we had Florida State at 4. We had was it Ohio State at 3, Michigan at 2, and then Georgia at 1. So just your collective thoughts on that top 5 real fast.
Well, Florida State and Washington are the same as the real ranking. So I'm just going to address the top 3. Um, really, putting Georgia at 1, I just felt like was, I think it's partially the benefit of the doubt, but also they've really turned it on here these last few weeks. Um, they, I think, were pushed a little bit early on in the season and were kind of just finding themselves. I mean, they've had to replace a lot of players. Like, that's the thing that people need to be reminded of. Like, it's not the same football team, but the pipeline just has to be given a chance to just, you know, realign themselves and get acclimated. And it feels like now they're there and the talent is still completely there. And whether they're going to show up and step out to the plate and win the SEC, that's the question, because they got to win out. And as of right now, I don't really see a reason to believe that they won't. So I think for those reasons, I think you got to put them at 1. And then Michigan, Ohio State, it's really splitting hairs there. That's going to be settled here in a few weeks. So no matter what order you want to put those two in, it's going to be settled on the field. So I wasn't really too pressed about those two.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Ultimately, Georgia has a interesting stretch of games coming up with Missouri this weekend, and then I think they play Ole Miss and Tennessee back-to-back weeks. Question is there potentially going to be a slip up in one of those 3 games before they finish off their season? I think you got to give a lot of credit to Carson Beck. I think he's growing in that offense as the weeks go by. I think they've shown more from a defensive standpoint, generating pressure, getting in the backfield, defending the run game. The past couple of weeks, they've kind of been more of a online typical Kirby Smart defense with their physicality and their domination up front. They do get off to some slow starts in games, but they've been able to remedy that later on in football games. It just feels like sometimes it takes them a little bit to get their rhythm. But I think Carson Beck is a really good player. I think he's growing game by game, which you love to see. They've had some injuries in their backfield, which have been, I don't want to say that's really had any effect on their offense, but it would be nice to have those guys in there. I think they're just Georgia, man. There's really nothing else you can say right now until they lose a game, which hasn't happened yet. I still think, Michigan is on par with Georgia. I think if they played in a game in Ann Arbor, like this Saturday, I might even favor Michigan because I think J.J. McCarthy is a bona fide Heisman contender at this point, like we talked about on one of the last episodes of Dit Hole. Blake Corum is an excellent back. They have enough skilled wide receiver talent on the outside, and that's an offensive line that's won the award for the best offensive line in college football 2 consecutive years, and they might win it again with what they've been doing, destroying teams up front. Their defense suffocates people. I mean, what does Joel Klatt say? They're basically like a python or a boa constrictor. They just kind of, they're a snake that chokes you out over time. And all of a sudden, gravity hits, and they're really good. And then Ohio State, if you're just going off resume, they have been probably the number 1 team to this point, as we discussed earlier. I've been higher on Florida State than most people. I think they're probably going to run the table and get in. And then Washington's pretty self-explanatory. So sorry for my cough. I don't know where this is coming from. Okay. Let's move on to Ryan Wingo real fast. I know you're not huge into recruiting, but this was a big one. 5-star commit last Wednesday. Ryan Wingo out of the state of Missouri. One of the 1 or 2 few 5-stars that state produces each year. And Texas was able to land him with a big push in the last 48 hours of this recruitment to this point. A recruitment that I do not think is over yet. I still think Missouri is going to make a push. They're going to see if they can come back with a better NIL package. They're going to see if they could potentially get close to Texas, what they could potentially do. Maybe they can get them on campus for a game in November before, the SEC championship game and bowl games. But right now, I think Wingo's pretty, as he said, when he committed, I think he's pretty solid in his commitment to Texas. This was a big one leading up to to this decision, I mean, Ryan Wingo moved up his timeline to make this commitment at his high school. I think it's St. Louis University High School in the state of Missouri. He moved up this commitment and he invited a lot of the guys in this current Missouri recruiting class, including the other 5-star they have in their recruiting class, the defensive lineman, I'm blanking on his name, that's right up there with Colin Simmons, with where he's kind of ranked nationally. He invited a lot of his friends to this announcement at his high school last Wednesday. And I think leading up to it, a lot of people thought he was moving up his announcement date to pick Missouri because it would be a lot easier to, I guess, from most people's perspective, to pick Missouri, earn some NIL money, and then later on, before signing day, which we have about 6 weeks until signing day, you could potentially flip to Texas if you wanted to. But Texas made a big push in the last 48 hours, and they were really able to land a really unique prospect here in Ryan Wingo, a big commitment, especially for the 2024 class. When we're talking about what Texas may lose at the wide receiver position going into next year. And I think they'll dip into the portal after the season is over to try to find the 2024 version of Adonai Mitchell, especially if Mitchell leaves and goes into the draft, which I think at this point is a pretty foregone conclusion given how he's played and, his history with injuries and all that kind of stuff. I think he came to Texas to get 1 year in this offense, to really shine through in this offense before ultimately going to the draft. They're definitely probably going to lose Xavier Worthy. They're losing Jatavion Sanders after this year. So when you really think about, they might even lose Jordan Whittington. Now, where all those guys get drafted is a whole nother story. But there's going to be a lot of talent leaving this Texas wide receiver room. You have a new wide receiver coach in Chris Jackson, who's been in the NFL for a long time, played in the NFL actually, but is new to this whole college football landscape, especially from a recruiting standpoint, NIL, transfer portal, not only recruiting in-state, but recruiting out of state, as there's kind of a different way you have to go about things. Building relationships with these guys as a new guy in college football is not always the easiest. I mean, a lot of these coaches in college football they've been doing this for a long time, and they've built up connections across the country. They've been at different schools. They've been to different high schools and say this state, this state, this state, and this state, and they've built their pipelines out from both a positional standpoint and just an overall standpoint. From like Sark, for example, he's really kind of pushing in that Dallas-Fort Worth area with Duncanville and DeSoto high schools in Texas, and he's gone out to Mater Dei in Southern California to grab a couple guys lately. He's gone to IMG Academy in Florida to get a couple elite prospects. He's starting to build out these pipelines, not only in state, but out of state. And now you go into Missouri and you pick one of their prized possessions from a high school standpoint. I mean, he's just been a man amongst boys so far in his high school days at St. Louis High in Missouri. He's a composite 5-star, really elite prospect. I've heard comparisons to A.J. Brown. I've heard comparisons to DK Metcalf. There's been a couple other interesting ones in there, but I want to get your thoughts on him as a prospect, this overall kind of whirlwind of a recruiting process that ultimately culminates in him kind of unexpectedly committing to Texas.
Well, a couple things. The number one thing I'm most excited about with him is just the possibility of the run after catch threat that Sark is going to be able to just mold in whatever way he wants. Just a guy who can take a slant route, break 4 tackles, and break it for 6 on any part of the field at any given time. That's really what it is. I mean, the speed, the size. I mean, it's all there. So that's a huge deal. Xavier Worthy is one thing because obviously he has that extra gear with his speed, but the extra physicality standpoint to add it on top of that's a different level. And then number 2, I think from a red zone jump ball standpoint, I think he's really, really good. I mean, from based on what he's shown on tape, and obviously he's playing against Missouri competition. That's a little bit different, but to me, that's just a mindset thing, and he's shown that he has that go get the football type of mentality. And if he's winning those tough one-on-one catches, um, you know, as consistently as he is, there's a good chance that'll translate over into college football, which is huge for Texas.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about recruiting down the road. We need to get on with other things, but I'll just give you the industry breakdown real fast. 4 major services, as I've mentioned in the past. On3 actually has him as a low 4-star, number 92 nationally, the number 4 overall prospect in Missouri. I'm not sure why they are so low on Ryan Wingo, but with his high school season and everything, these rankings change, and I expect him to get up to that high 4-star, 5-star level eventually. Wouldn't worry too much about that. ESPN has him as a borderline 5-star, high 4-star, number 27 overall nationally, number 2 in Missouri. Um, Rivals.com has him as a 5-star prospect, number 19 overall nationally, the number 2 overall prospect in Missouri, the number 1 prospect being that edge rusher that I was talking about earlier. And then 24/7 has him 5-star prospect and number 5 overall prospect nationally. So 24/7 is really, really high on Ryan Wingo and his physical build and his skill set. Number 2 overall nationally. That comes out for a composite rating of a 5-star, number 24 overall nationally, number 2 in Missouri. This guy, I mean, he really could have gone anywhere. He could have gone to Georgia. He could have gone to Michigan. He had offers by Missouri, Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, Florida, LSU, Miami, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Oregon, Penn State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, USC. The list goes on. 6'2", 195, 200 pounds right now. They think he could put on 15, 20 pounds with his frame. And that's scary when you consider that he also runs a 10.5, 100-meter straight line speed dash, if you will. He's just a physical handful for all his opponents. I think he's going to actually complement – did my voice just crack? He's going to complement Jonte Cook really, really well with his skill set as opposed to Jonte Cook's skill set. I think that's really all we need to say right now. There are potentially 1 or 2 more 5-stars on the way for Texas here in the next couple of weeks. So we will see where that goes. But we need to get to this college basketball conversation, which I'm very excited about. So how about this? If we let's go into let's go for the next 20-ish minutes talking college basketball. We'll wrap this up around 11:40, 11:45, definitely before midnight. And if we can't get to everything, we can squeeze a little more in on Thursday or Friday. We're going to be talking about teams in our national championship bubble. This is what we've been waiting to do for a couple of days now. So, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. Really, to me, there's a checklist when it comes to college basketball and winning in March. Number 1, you got to be great defensively. There's no way you're getting through a tournament being subpar defending the three ball or subpar defending the rim or both. There's no way. And then number two, veteran guard play is a big one. Um, it's like an on court coach at that point. It's a little bit different in college basketball where they're running a lot of sets, and in order to get into those actions, you got to have an intelligent guard and someone who's experienced to lead that charge. So that's another big one to me. And then obviously the coaching part of things is huge as well in college basketball, as we've talked about so many times. Coaching in college basketball is arguably, a bigger part than any other sport we talk about on this podcast, really.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So huge thing is the coaching. And then lastly, what are you in half court offense? Like shot making, 3-point shooting, like what is your go to when you need a bucket? Those types of things are what's gonna like get you through those crunch time moments late in the second half in a March Madness game. Like, are you gonna be able to execute at a high level in your offensive sets in high pressure moments? And obviously, that's one of those things we won't know until we watch
Yeah.
months and months of basketball. But some of these teams, we have a pretty good idea of what their track record is.
Yep. Was there one in particular that comes to mind that you want to start with?
I'm going to start with Marquette. I believe was knocked out pretty early in the tournament. I can't quite remember, but they check most of those boxes. The playmaking, the veteran guard play.
Yep.
They also have playmaking at the center position at in Oso Okadaro. Is that how you say
Yep.
it?
Yeah.
They feel like a very cohesive team as well. They were a team that was very consistent last year in the Big East. So that's a team I trust. I think in terms of tournament play, you could probably nitpick Shaka Smart a little bit. Thinking back to his time at Texas and even longer before that, he was at VCU. He had that big tournament run. So it's not like he hasn't gone deep in the tournament before, but not recently.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. To be honest with you, Marquette was the first team that I thought of. To me, right now, I would put them favorite in the Big East, preseason favorite in the Big East. Now, some would argue Creighton. They could even be put in this conversation possibly. Some would argue UConn with their returning roster from what was a national championship team last year. But I think Marquette, who was very consistent last year up until the tournament, they won both the regular season and postseason titles in the Big East. They are a veteran team. They're returning 4 starters. They only lost Olivier Maxence Prosper from this rotation to the NBA draft. And he was a great glue guy for this Golden Eagles team. But you return the Big East 6-man of the year last year in David Joplin. He'll slide into the starting lineup alongside Oso Igudoro, I think is how you say it. So they're big on the front line. Tyler Collett, I think, is a definite preseason All-American in that backcourt, along with Stevie Mitchell and Cam Jones. I like their bench too. I just think in terms of their playmaking on the front line with a star in their backcourt, with their roster continuity, their veteran presence, their head coach, I think all of it makes for a really, really really good basketball team. And if we're going to talk Texas basketball, Texas' toughest non-conference game this year is at Marquette. I think early December. So um, we'll see what happens. But I think Marquette is absolutely in the conversation of the top 6-7 teams nationally. They're in that preseason national championship bubble. We really haven't talked about, I think, the obvious one yet, and that is Kansas. So, do you have any thoughts on the Jayhawks and Bill Self?
Yeah, I mean, you have to consider them for sure in that top five bubble. It's tough. They played uh, I guess it was a exhibition game. I think it was about a week ago against Illinois. Um, I think the thing that stood out to me from that, obviously, you can't take a whole ton from it, but for one, the pace they want to play, they get out and run in the fast break, and they have speed at the guard position. So um, I think that's when they're going to be at their best is out in the fast break and getting defensive stops and leading the charge and getting out and running. That's going to be the big key for them. The 3-point shooting, the consistent scoring from Hunter Dickinson. I think that's going to be what you're going to be able to count on from this Kansas team, and I think you can feel pretty confident in their ability to score the basketball.
Absolutely. I think there are some questions about how good of a shooting team this is, but I think what makes them so good offensively is they have playmakers at all five positions. Really, I mean, when you think about this team's passing ability in particular, um, DeJuan Harris Jr. at the point guard position, he's one of the best guards in college basketball at making those pocket passes, those reads in the pick and roll. And when you think about what he's going to be able to do now with both KJ Adams at the 4 and Hunter Dickinson at the 5, with their skill sets and their passing ability as well, I mean, it's just going to be kind of a motion offense. They're smart veteran team, well coached. Kevin McCullough Jr., I think, is a guy I'm looking to take that next step. He was a transfer from Texas Tech that came in, I think it was last year, but didn't have as much of an impact on that team last year as I think most thought he would. He's a capable passer, and he's a really good cutter. Moves without the ball excellently, and I think he complements DeJuan Harris Jr., Hunter Dickinson, and KJ Adams really, really well. They look like they have pretty good chemistry. Bill Self, I think, is going to have a blast just playing with Adams and Dickinson in that front court and finding new ways that they can create mismatches and advantage situations and half court sets. Um, I like their bench. I think Nick Timberlake is a guy who will come in as a freshman guard, can really shoot the ball. I think he'll be kind of that sixth man for them. Beyond that, I don't know too much, to be honest with you. But I love their speed, their positional length. You add Dickinson to kind of this already really, really good offense with, I think, the best coach right now in college basketball. And I think they'd have to be the favorites in the Big 12 along with Houston. And that's a really, really tough league. So you know that they'll be battle tested come postseason time. There are some questions. I mean, I wouldn't draw too much from the exhibition. It was fun to watch, though. There was another one in between Michigan State and Tennessee that I watched some of as well. Maybe we'll talk about those teams later or sometime else. But I really like uh, um, Kansas. I think the only questions are shooting and then what happens to their depth if, say, DeJuan Harris Jr. maybe goes down for 2 or 3 weeks, or Hunter Dickinson has to miss a week or two, or one of these guys in that starting lineup has to, miss a couple weeks to a month with a potential injury. I mean, of course, we don't want that to happen, but things happen in college basketball. And I question their depth a little bit, and I also question how many real shooters they have on this team. But everything else, from the coaching to the on-ball defense to their offensive versatility to their experience, they check all those boxes, and they should be in the national championship conversation. Let's talk about one or two more teams before we wrap this thing up. I know we didn't quite get to everything that we wanted to, but let's talk a little bit about Purdue. They're an interesting one coming off that upset loss in the NCAA tournament last year to Farley Dickinson in that first round, the biggest upset of last year's tournament. Your thoughts on Purdue? They do return Zach Edey, but they're trying to rebound from what was a disappointing end to last year.
Well, the biggest thing for Purdue was, I think, surrounding Zach Edey with not only shooting, but guys who can, make those extra plays off the dribble. And obviously, you're going to surround the attack around a guy like Zach Edey. That's no question about that. But in those games where, Edey's in foul trouble or Edey just isn't on that night, you got to have guys who are going to go out and get their buckets as well. And Purdue had that last year, but they weren't able to fully show it in that March Madness game. And obviously, that's a 1-game sample size. That's not really the true talent shown of this team. But they came back and they added more depth to what was already a number 1 seed level team. So they're going to be in the mix. There's no question about that. I think you still question maybe just they have some demons to overcome. That's definitely something to question. But from a talent standpoint, I don't think you can really have too many qualms about what Purdue has to offer.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just following the end of this Spurs game. You think Phoenix was winning? They were, but now some interesting things are happening at the end of that basketball game. Let's just say that. Yeah, I think you nailed it. My questions with Purdue really come down to the tournament and being able to make perimeter shots. It would be a lot harder for, say, a team like Farley Dickinson last year in the tournament to pull off what they did if the Boilermakers could just make open jumpers. That the attention around a centerpiece like Zach Edey creates. But Spurs win 115-114. Keldon Johnson, 27 points. Wow. Big win for San Antonio. I know no Booker, no Beal, but it looked like for a while in that game, it might be kind of a relash of what happened a couple nights ago when the Spurs traveled to Los Angeles to play the Clippers and got thrashed by 40 points. But that, I think, is big for this Spurs team, showing the toughness for the youngest team in the NBA to come back and win that game. I'll have to go back and watch the highlights of the end of that game. But one thing I think you can kind of take from Wemby early on is he has kind of a knack lately for kind of
fourth quarter
slowly working his way into these games, finding a rhythm. Doesn't look all that great early, but in the fourth quarter, he's been I don't want to say like he's been good for a 19-year-old prospect. In the fourth quarter. This is an NBA show. Let's talk about NBA later. But I'm excited they won that game, and I didn't even watch it. Can't really claim too much there. I just wanted to see real fast what Wimby finished with. Keldon Johnson finished with 27, so he had a game. Um, Wimby finished with 18 on 6 of 12 shooting, 8 rebounds, 1 assist. Don't know how many blocks, but he was 2 of 6 from 3. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what he's done, right around where he's been the first 4 games of his career. Big win, going to 2-2 instead of 1-3. They'll play the Suns again on Thursday, which will be interesting. But yeah, I think the thing for Purdue will be making timely perimeter shots in the tournament and then running some more pick and roll offense. They didn't really do a whole lot of that last year. They were 316th in ball screen usage last year, which is really, really weird, especially when you consider they have a guy like Zach Edey, who you would think they would just pound the hell out of that 2-man game in the pick and roll, high low. But they did have young guards last year with Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. I'm looking for a big year from Fletcher Lawyer, who's more of that shooter type. Braden Smith is more of that floor general type. Fletcher Lawyer shot 32% from 3 as a freshman, but I think he has the potential to shoot way better than that number this year as a sophomore. And if he does, Purdue could be really, really dangerous, as you obviously expect to get, you know, all-American level production from Zach Edey. So, sorry guys for my little bit of, I don't know if it's allergies or something. I'm not sick. I was sick a couple weeks ago. I'm not sick. It must be something. But sorry about that.
He's ill, not sick. It's a Lil Wayne lyric.
Laughing will make it even worse, but that was a good one. So thank you guys for tuning in. The reason I didn't bring up Duke, because I think they're should be in this conversation, is because we kind of talked about them on our last episode. We've talked about Houston. Some of the teams we haven't talked about yet:
Tennessee,
Michigan State, UConn. You could even put Creighton, Arizona. I think Villanova is the sleeper team this year. They didn't have a great year last year under their first-year coach, Kyle Neptune, but watch out. I think they could be a team that 1 or 2 months into the season we could look at, and they could be entering the conversation in the Big East with those big 3 at the top. I think, right now it's probably Marquette, Creighton, and UConn right there. And then Villanova's kind of right now on the outside looking in. They still got to do it, but they could be a dangerous team in the Big East. Team not a lot of people will talk about, as you probably forgot last year, but Florida Atlantic, I think, could be really, really good, especially in the regular season. They are moving into the American, so a little bit of a tougher conference, but they went 35-4 and won a league that, say what you want about it, but they won a league that had the NIT champs from last year and the NIT runner-up. So they had some good teams in that league. They return a lot as well. They're kind of very similar to Marquette in a way. And then you have teams like Houston, who we mentioned. And then you kind of get into that tier of some interesting teams with Illinois, Kentucky, Gonzaga, North Carolina, Texas, Miami, UCLA. A&M is a team in the SEC that is expected to do some good things last year, or do some good things this year, but I need to see it to believe it. St. Mary's is always pretty good. Auburn, let's see if they can rebound with Bruce Pearl. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. The Athletic, I'm surprised, has Virginia in their top 25. But you never really want to count out Tony Bennett and crew. So I'm gonna go watch the highlights of this Spurs game, see what went on. I'm really intrigued. But
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
really want to know what the heck happened because when I watched, it was a 20. It was kind of yo-yoing from a 20-point game to back to a 10-point game, but
Yeah,
the Suns were in control.
yeah. Um, let's see if I can glean anything from the box score. Yeah, the Spurs outscored the Suns 33-19 in the fourth quarter and
Wow.
37-32 in the third. So I guess I mean they
Good
put up
defense.
70 in the second half, which is fairly impressive. They outscored the Suns 70 to let's see 32 70 to 51 in the second half. If my math is correct, 32 plus 19 is 51. So I'm gonna go watch the highlights, see what went on, see if my man uh, Hoops Tonight, Jason Timpf, potentially puts out a breakdown of what happened in this game, as it was a nationally televised game on TNT. And the Spurs will get more of those this year, which I'm really excited about. I think let's just talk about this real quick. Would you rather potentially do an NBA episode this week, or do you think there was enough at the NFL trade deadline to do something with that? I personally, there were a couple trades that I think would be interesting to talk about, but I think we can kind of incorporate it into our top 10 power rankings tomorrow.
Yeah, I think so too. I think really there's a conversation to be had about Washington, and then maybe the Leonard Williams trade. But outside of that, it it wasn't a whole lot worth talking about. I wouldn't
Yeah.
say.
Okay. Um, the in-season tournament, I believe, kicks off Friday.
Friday, yeah,
So maybe our NBA episodes will officially kick off early next week. We don't know yet. But thank you guys for tuning in. I know it's late. Thank you, Emmy, for coming on as always. Really appreciate that. Hopefully he'll be back Thursday or Friday. Probably more likely Friday. I don't know at this point because my Steelers are playing on Thursday. But do I want to watch that? Do I want to bleed my eyes out watching that again? We will see. With all that being said, hook 'em horns. Have a great rest of your Halloween. What is left of it at this point? 15 more minutes. I got some candy today at work. But I don't have a whole lot of candy here. I don't know about you. I'm not really I've kind of been on a trying to, not that I need a diet or anything, but um, I've just been subconsciously eating better the past month or two. I don't know if that just is a product of not really thinking about eating, because I used to, eat a bunch. Not that I still don't, but it just be kind of like I get bored and I think about eating and I go eat. Um, Now it's kind of like with work and everything. I just get my 3 meals, have a snack here or there. And yeah, let's do that in a Patreon episode. That's not for
yeah.
me.
The days I work, I don't eat a whole ton either. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So thank you guys for listening. We'll be back tomorrow for, I know I'm wearing Emmy out, for our top 10 NFL power rankings bi-weekly. So see you guys then. Hook 'em horns. We have a dogfight this weekend with
yep.
K-State Wildcats. We'll be breaking that game down along with LSU, Bama, and potentially Bedlam. But with all that being said, I'm excited for college basketball. And just like the chances of, um, gosh, um, just like the chances of Ryan Wingo committing to Missouri, we are going, gone. Peace out, everyone.
Go Rangers.